All right. Okay. Hello, Professor Gray. Great to have you in the live stream room.
It's great to be here. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for making time. I think we are thankful for the opportunity to talk about your book. Your book English name is Free to Learn, and the Chinese name is 玩耍是最认真的学习. I know it was a book actually you wrote in 2013. And luckily now after 10 years, we were able to introduce this book to the Chinese audience. And thank you for being able to write this book and speaking to us about it today. All right. Okay. So to start, I will first have a briefly talk about who is Professor Gray. And I think I see you as sort of two identities. One is, of course, your academic and a research identity. You're a evolutionary psychologist. Is that the right word?
Correct. Yes. Yes.
So he's a psychologist, but he actually studies psychology from sort of a human development or even some anthropology kind of angle, and talk about how we as a human race develop our way of reacting to the world. And then, of course, in that capacity, he's actually very famous and renowned because he's the author of the widely used introductory book of psychology. For now, it's the 8th edition, if I know it right.
Yes.
Right. And then, so it was a book that was really probably the most widely used as an introductory book for major university and college curriculum. And of course, he's being a professor himself for his life. And then after he retired, now about 20 years ago, and
Correct. Yes.
he's still very active, engaged as a researcher in Boston College. So that's one side of him. He has a lot of students, a lot of academic work he has pioneered. On the other hand, I also saw him as a troubled father, at least used to be. And then from that angle, started to really think about or rethink about education and what we have done collectively to childhood. I think that's how he started his first chapter of the book. And then you actually wrote a very touching story. I think the basic introduction part, you talk about both you and your wife were in tears when you were in the principal's office with your son at a public school. Maybe we start from there. Like, what triggered you to think about this bigger issue of play, of free to learn? And what's the starting point?
Yeah. So, well, thank you. Thank you for that very nice introduction. And I'm really very, very pleased that the book is being published in China, and very pleased to be talking with you right now. So so I was originally doing neuroscience in the laboratory. I was studying the brains of rats and mice and how certain hormones bind in the brains and affect their behavior. I was really more of a neuroscientist than a psychologist, although I did write an introductory psychology textbook in order to familiarize myself with psychology, as you pointed out. But meanwhile, I was also a father to a young son, who was a very independent-minded person. He was just born independent-minded. I don't think I made him that way. I think that there was just something about him that right from the start, he had his own personality, he had his own ideas. He insisted on being listened to and not just told what to do. He would argue with us. He would, and I think we kind of liked that, actually, both his mother and I. You know, he was a real person. He was not a puppet. He was a person. Right from the beginning. And but when he started school, even right from the beginning, 5 years old, going to kindergarten, it was supposedly a nice public suburban school, good reputation. But right from the beginning, he hated it. He hated how he was being treated. He felt like, at home, he was treated like a person. At school, he was treated like a puppet. He was supposed to do whatever they told him to do. And he said, well, why would I do it that way? There's this other way to do it. And that, of course, in school, you can't do that. If everybody did that, you couldn't manage the classroom, right? So I'm sympathetic with the teachers, but he simply would not follow the directions. He wouldn't do what they asked him to do if he thought it was foolish, if he thought that there was another way to do it. And he would do things, he would deliberately do the assignments in some other way than the way he was told.
Yeah.
And so the result of that is that his mother and I, my late wife and I, would constantly being called into the into the school to talk about what are we going to do with this boy. And I think they thought it was our fault, that his mother's and my fault, that we weren't making him shape up somehow. And maybe they're partly right. I don't know, but I don't know what we could have done. We're not the kind of parents who would beat a child, and even that wouldn't work, right? So the so at any rate, we kept thinking, well, maybe it'll get better in the next grade. It'll be a new teacher. So this went all the way on, and he fought it all the way on through fourth grade, through the end of fourth grade. And by the time that late in fourth grade, he was rebelling so much in school, making it so hard for the teachers that they didn't know what to do. And so there was this big meeting in the principal's office at the school, where his mother and me, the principal, the assistant principal, a school psychologist, another psychologist who had been brought in from the outside, and I think one other person, all of us big adults, and my little son, 9 years old, we were all there to tell him in a united voice, no uncertain terms. Each one of us said our piece about how you've got to follow the rules in school. There's no choice. You have to follow the rules in school. And we all said our piece. And then he looked at us and he said, go to hell. My 9-year-old son telling us all, big authorities, to go to hell. He wasn't going to do what we were telling him to do. And so that was the moment I looked at my wife and she looked at me, and we could see we both had tears in our eyes. Not because, I don't think because we felt that we had failed him, but because we realized that he was right and we had to be on his side. He won this fight. And we had to be on his side and not against him. And clearly the school, he was not going to reform himself, fit himself to school. He just wasn't going to do it. I had been telling him all along, I kept saying, it'd be so much easier if you would just do what you're told to do. It's not that hard. Just do what you're told to do. You're just making things hard for you. You're making things hard for your mom, for me. He would have none of that. So we realized at that point, we've got to find something else for him. And, some people were homeschooling in the United States at that point. It wasn't nearly as popular as it is today. There are many homeschoolers today.
Yeah.
But for a variety of reasons, homeschooling wouldn't have worked very well for us at that time anyway. So we looked at various schools. And we went and visited various schools, and most of them were private schools that we couldn't really have afforded anyway. But we thought, well, maybe he could get a scholarship. He would always do very well on tests. So if he took a test, he would do very well. But we'd visit these private schools. They were kind of progressive schools, and he would say, well, this is still a prison. It's a little bit nicer prison, but it's still a prison. And then we finally found the Sudbury Valley School. I should say that we were aware of the Sudbury Valley School all along, but it was such a radically different school that it was kind of the last on our list that we would go and visit. But when we took him there, he said, if what I'm seeing is true, this is what a school should be. This was what a school should be. And so Here's what the Sudbury, this was a school, it was only 2 miles away from where we lived, which at that time, today, most parents wouldn't allow the 9-year-old to walk 2 miles. But at that time, that was easy walking distance for a child, 9 years old. So actually, it was 10 years old by the time he started the school because he started the next fall. So this was a school that not only are there no required classes, but there are no classes offered. If a group of children want a course, they can organize one and they could usually talk a staff member into leading it. But the staff members don't call themselves teachers because they don't believe they do any more teaching than anybody else at the school. There are children there over the whole school age range, from age 4 on through teenage years, on through the typical high school age. But they're not assigned to separate spaces. They can go anywhere they want, regardless of age, and they mix in age. There are all kinds of opportunities for learning, but nothing is required, and there's no testing at all. So the children are truly free to do what they want as long as they follow the rules of the school, and the rules are made in a democratic fashion so that every student and staff member has one vote in making the rules. And the rules have to do with kind of the kinds of things that any community needs to have rules so you don't interfere with what other people are doing. You have to be quiet in the quiet room. You have to, if you take something out, you have to put it away. If there was a kind of an anti-bullying rule, which is if you're doing something to somebody else and they tell you to stop in a serious voice, you have to stop. You can't keep poking them in the ribs or calling them some name or whatever it is you were doing that they don't want you to do. So there's certain rules like that, but they're made democratically and they're enforced democratically so that if somebody breaks a rule, anybody, whether it's a student or staff member, who's disturbed by that breaking of the rule, could bring them up to the judicial committee, which consists of at least one member of each broad age group. There's always 1 or 2 little kids, 1 or 2 sort of middle-sized kids, 1 or 2 teenagers, and 1 adult staff member in that judicial committee. And then it gets discussed and some decision is made about first of all, whether the person really did what they're accused of doing, and if they did, what should be done about it. So that's the way the school operates. It's as different from a typical school as you can imagine. And so my son was completely happy there, and I was happy that he was happy. I was happy that we weren't being called into the principal's office all the time to talk about my awful son. So and I really and truly wasn't worried about his learning because he's a bright kid. He's always learning. He's very self-motivated. So I wasn't worried about that, but here's what I was worried about. As you know, I was a college professor. I honestly believe I'm not the kind of parent who would require my son to go to college or push him to go to college, but I would want him to have that opportunity. So suppose he decided on some career, maybe wanted to be a doctor or a lawyer or something that kind of required that you go to college. Would he be able to do it? Would he be able to go on from a school like this?
Yeah.
That was probably my main question. And I'd ask people about graduates, and I'd hear about so and so went to college, but being a scientist, I didn't want just a few anecdotes. I wanted to know for the whole population who's graduated from this school, how have they done? Are they happy or not happy that they went to such a school now that they're adults, the ones who graduated? How many went to college? How did they do in college? How did they get in if they want? So along with a person, David Chanoff was his name, who was at that time a part-time staff member at the school and who helped me locate the graduates of the school at that time. We did a study of the graduates, and there were about 80 graduates at that time. So we did a study that really, I have to say, it was the most important in my career. It was by far the most mind-opening study that I've ever done. So here was a group of people adults who had not done school as we usually think of school.
Yeah.
And they were out there in the real world doing very well. They had good jobs. Those who wanted to go to higher education, the university didn't have any difficulty doing it. They did fine there. They were happy with their lives. They had jobs that they enjoyed. And they had come from a wide variety of backgrounds. Some of them, like my son, were people who had rebelled in school, but who were very bright. But some were people who had been failing in school, and some were people who never went to another school. Their parents just believed in this from the beginning, and they sent them right from the beginning. But a lot of them were people who had gone because they had some kind of a problem in school. Maybe, something didn't work out. So by the typical school's definition, they weren't the cream of the crop. They were kids who were kind of failing in school. And yet here they were, very successful out there in life. And I couldn't see any, it seemed like there were the whole range of personalities. And I couldn't see that does this only work for certain people. It seemed to work for people some people who were very much extroverted, some who were introverted, some who, I didn't see anybody who people say, well, maybe this would just work for people who are very self-motivated. And my observation is that when people are free, it may take a little while but they are self-motivated. It's natural to be self-motivated. And so I didn't, so at any rate, it seemed to work, for all, I'm sure there are some people who have a very serious neurological condition. If you're very far out on the autism spectrum or something like that, you need extra help that the school wouldn't provide. But for people within the neurotypical range, it seemed to work for everybody. So that was really what got me started. Ultimately, I gradually stopped doing the rat work in the lab and began to get more and more interested. So then the question was, well, here's this group of people who didn't do school. And when I look at what happens at the school, it looks like they're just playing. They're doing what you'd think kids would do. It's not that they're sitting down and studying algebra textbooks, on their own. No, they're just playing. There's a few people who've decided they want to go on to higher education. They need to take a math test, and they're studying, and they're asking. Well, for the most part, they're playing, they're exploring, they're talking, they're listening to music. They're doing all the things you would think kids would do when kids are free, and yet, somehow, by any reasonable definition of education, they're being educated. So my definition of education is that it is everything that you learn that enables you to live a satisfying and meaningful life. And these people were living a satisfying and meaningful life.
Mm-hmm.
And so I would say they were well educated. And so then how did they become educated? And that's what led me. So what is it about? What are they really doing when they're playing? What are they really doing when they're just hanging out, talking with one another? How is it that they become educated through their own efforts in that kind of an environment?
Yeah. Thank you for that history. So interesting. May I ask when did you do that research of the 80 graduates? What
So
year?
this was a long time ago. This was in about 19. So my son had started there in the late 1970s, and we did this study. The study, if I remember, was published in 1984, and it was probably done a couple of years before that.
Wow.
So
And then
this was a long time ago.
yeah, and then the school, if I got it right, was founded in 1965 by a couple.
1968, actually. The school was founded in 1968. So at the time that I did the study, it had already been around long enough that there were graduates who had done some graduates who had done all their schooling there.
Yeah.
And
Well,
the school is still going now, 55 years later. So
was it still the founding couple, or I guess, or they have aged?
so the founding couple were with the school for 50 years. The Daniel Greenberg, who was probably the primary founder. He never takes credit for being the founder. He always says that he was just one of a number of parents who founded it, but he was the leading voice for it. He was the one who wrote the books about it and so on and so forth. But he died 2 years ago, and his wife has been ill and retired, so they're no longer involved with the school, but they were involved with the school for a long, long time.
Half a century.
Yes, exactly.
Wow. But then I suppose the school is still continuing with the same type of governance as you described.
That's exactly right. It still works in the very same way that it did
Wow.
at that time.
Wow. Thank you. So for those who are interested in the school, so actually in Peter's book, there's a chapter about the school, just exactly learnings from the Sudbury Valley School. And then the Chinese name, the translator put, it's actually quite nice, called 涩谷学校. Anyway, so it was the whole thing about how the school is a true democracy, how the school is actually built for education, and also actually talked about what Peter mentioned, why the graduates were successful. And I think, and also talk about how activities in school were connected with their real life success in the real society, right? Because people could probably hear about the story, think, oh, this is sort of some outlandish paradise like you built, has nothing to do with the world. But obviously, as what Peter has mentioned, both in the work that's done now, more than 30 years ago until today, that's not true. That's the opposite. Frankly, they prepare them better for the real world. And I think that leads to my next question, because actually exactly in this book, again, if you get this book, again, you can purchase this book in the
Right.
in the stream in the online shop. But then one of the sort of a hook when Peter talked about this book, and basically have this analogy and saying that this school is built as a hunter-gatherer tribe. And then of course you probably haven't heard of like, what does it mean? So I think that will be our next question. As a when you think about evolutionary psychologists, why this whole hunter-gatherer tribe idea important, and why is it relevant when we think about education?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the founders of the school didn't try to emulate a hunter-gatherer band. They were thinking, well, what they knew about kids and how kids learn, and they were very insightful in that. And they're very much believing in democracy, and they believe that the United States being a democratic nation, it's very important that children grow up experiencing democracy. If you want democratic citizens, you need to raise them, their view, in a democratic environment. So they conceived of the school as a democracy where children have all the rights of citizens in that democracy. So that was their thinking about it. As I got interested in the question of how children are learning, and as a biologically oriented psychologist, I of course began to think, well, what are the instincts that children have that lead them to learn? What are the innate tendencies? I know they play, they're curious, but how do they play, and why do they play in certain kinds of ways and not other kinds of ways? And what is ultimately the purpose of this very strong drive that children have to play? What is ultimately the purpose of the strong curiosity that children have? That when children are free, they're exploring the world around them all the time, almost from the time they're born on to, unless we quash it in school, they just continue exploring. Where does that all come from? Well, of course, during most of our biological history, we were all hunter-gatherers. So that leads to the question, well, if these instincts evolved when we were hunter-gatherers during most of our time, we've only had farming for about 10,000 years. And so for most of our life, been hunter-gatherers. And so I was curious about what the life of children in hunter-gatherer cultures is like. What's the relationship between adults and parents? And so, as you may know, there were into the 20th century, certainly a little bit still today, but not so much today, but certainly into the middle and even towards the second half of the 20th century, it was still possible for anthropologists to trek out into isolated parts of the world, in Africa, some parts of Asia, South America, and so on, and locate people who were still living in a hunter-gatherer kind of way.
Mm.
These are all what are called band cultures. So they're people who live in groups, small groups called bands of maybe 20 to 50 people, including children per band. And each band is independent of the others. They operate independently. They have friends in other bands. And so I began to read everything I could about children's lives in such bands, but I couldn't find a lot written about children. So along with a graduate student, we did a survey of anthropologists who had we surveyed a total of 10 different anthropologists who among them had lived in 7 different hunter-gatherer bands on 3 different continents. And we asked them questions about about children's lives, how children are treated by adults, what children spend their time doing, how children become educated in those bands. And what's interesting is that we got pretty much the same story from every anthropologist, even though these were groups living in very different parts of the world, and some were in deserts, some were in jungles, that the basic treatment of children was pretty similar in every case. And what I learned is that, first of all, children in hunter-gatherer bands have a remarkable degree of freedom. They're free to play and explore all day long. It's interesting that what the anthropologist told me is that that hunter-gatherer people consider children to have common sense when they're 4 years old. They don't need to be watched all the time by adults. They're not going to do something stupid like wander into the jungle and get eaten up by a tiger. They can follow rules. They know enough to stay with the older kids. They can run off, and parents don't have to watch them all the time. And so basically, children from the age of 4 on through the mid to even late teenage years have a lot of freedom and a lot of autonomy. They're off playing with one another. They're also around the campsite area. So these people are all kind of nomadic. So they don't have permanent dwellings. They move around from place to place, and they build huts wherever they are and stay for a period of time. They don't have to stay, the kids don't have to stay with the adults, although the kids often are interested in the adults and they want to participate in what the adults do. Even if it's slowing down the adults let them do that, but they don't require them to do that. So the kids have a lot of freedom, and basically the understanding seems to be among hunter-gatherer adults that this is how children learn what they need to learn. They play, they explore, you don't have to tell them to, they just kind of naturally play at the things that are important to the culture that they're growing up in. So if it's a culture where the men hunt big game, the boys play at hunting big game. Yeah, they might be hunting butterflies and toads, but they're pretending it's big game, and they're learning how to track, they're tracking one another. If it's a culture where the girls do a lot of fishing, the girls play at fishing. They may actually catch some fish, but it's really play. They're not. It's not like they're feeding the band, but they may bring some food back. In all of these cultures, both men and women build huts and cook, and both boys and girls play at those things. So they play at the things that they see are important, and that seems to be natural to kids. They look around, they see what are the things that seem to be, it's not that they say this consciously, but I think at some unconscious level, they're registering what are the things that people do here, in this world I'm growing up in. And I'm growing up, and I better learn how to do those things. And so they play at those things. They're not they don't think of themselves as learning. They just think of themselves as doing what it is that they want to do. Playing, it's not just at 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 the things that are economically essential. They play at the music of the culture, the dances of the culture, the games that are important to the whole culture. So they're acquiring the culture by mimicking it and extending it. It's not just mimicry, it's really incorporating what they observe into their play. So in a culture, for example, where the adults collect honey by climbing up in trees and collecting honey, that you'll find kids playing at collecting honey, climbing trees and going after pretend hives of bees. In a culture where they use dugout canoes, you'll find the kids playing at making dugout canoes, playing with dugout canoes, just on their own initiative. So this is, so when I say that Sudbury Valley is like that, they are free to do what they want. It's an age mixed group from age 4 on through teenagers. The little kids are learning by watching the big kids and by playing with the big kids. The big kids are learning to be leaders and helpers and teachers by playing with the younger kids. And this is all happening in a hunter-gatherer culture, just as it happens at the Sudbury Valley School.
Yeah, that's so beautiful. I think it was really struck me when I was reading, you talk about the four-year kind of age mark, because I think
Yes.
current sort of culture, 4 years is too young, right? Like, you're
Yeah.
still need to be in preschool or not yet even in kindergarten.
Right.
And you watched. And I think the other thing struck me when I was reading those chapters is it was actually a very simple observation, but it's so profound. It's like, well, suddenly we decide, first of all, kids, we actually all know kids were natural learners, like,
Right.
like they learn everything the first 1,000 days of their life, right? So like
Right.
we sitting in any lecture or getting any curriculum, they just learn
Right.
them. But somehow our mind works is like that kind of process got to stop when you turn 8, or when you turn 6 or 7, when you're
Right.
in the school system, because suddenly the assumption has been, okay, then your natural learning, is not enough. Okay, now we need to somehow put you into a highly rigid structure to
Right.
teach, right? So like it's almost laughable. Think about that assumption, like why the same individual who born to learn and so good at learning, and suddenly we decide by the time you turn 6 or 7 you can't learn
Right.
anymore. You have to toil for it. Right? You have to.
Yeah, isn't that ironic that we think that way? I used to be able to say, I'd talk to a group of parents and I would say, so remember how much you learned or how much your child learned before they ever started school, before anybody ever started to teach them in any way. They learned their whole native language. They learned an enormous amount about the world around them. Think of all they learned. Now, what if you just let them continue learning that way and so on? It's harder for me to say that now because sadly, people are starting to put their 3-year-olds in school these days. They're already getting structured learning when they're little tots. So, it's a little, so parents don't necessarily, in the United States, don't necessarily relate to that because they're already starting formal education
Yeah,
certainly by 4, but sometimes by 3.
yeah, no, absolutely. No, I have to tell you this, like the reason I started thinking about education is that when my son was 6 months old, there are
Yes.
already educational institutes, right? So you send them to play, to learn to play.
Yeah, right.
As a new parent, I didn't know better. I was like, okay, so if there's such business or institution, there must be a reason. So I did send my son. I paid money for it, for a play. And then I was like, well, the whole session was 45 minutes, but out of the 45 minutes, in 40 minutes, my son was just in the corner playing his own toes. I was like, this is
Yes.
like why I'm paying for this. I stopped it, but exactly to her point, because I think in a way every parent has a good intention, and then
Right.
our natural world told us, like, the way to translate your good intention to good results is sending them to a certain institution. And then so like we ended up, so like basically sign up for it, right? Because everybody want their kids to be good. All the parents want the best for their
Right.
children. But
Right.
then, what is the best I think, get lost in the process. We actually ended up sending our kids to something that's anti-education. So that leads to my next question, because you actually talked about in chapter 3 of your book. Again, for people who are interested in the book, the Chinese version is available. 大家可以在直播间下单这本书。So you talk about why school education becomes what it is, and you actually mentioned it earlier, saying like from the hunter-gatherer to the farming culture, right? So like it feels like the whole, yes, farming culture is much shorter. If you look at the evolutionary biology time scale, it's only in the recent 1,000 years. But of course, for most of us, this is sort of the entire human civilization we're aware of.
Yes.
Right? Like, how did that form sort of the school thinking we have today?
Yes. Yeah. So what happened is that so hunter-gatherers, one of the interesting things about hunter-gatherers that I learned from the anthropologists, they don't even have a word for work. They don't think they work. If they do have a word for it, it means what those farmers do, or what those people working on the road do, those other people do, not what they do. They don't think of hunting and gathering and building huts and all the things they do. They don't think of that as work. They just think of that as fun and play. So learning is play too. I mean, everything. I wrote an article published in the American Journal of Play about the idea that the whole social life of hunter-gatherers is based on an attitude that life is fun and playful, and they manage to manage that. I mean, you don't, for example, you don't have to hunt because there's always plenty of people who want to hunt. So if you're a man who feels like laying around in the hammock all day for 10 days, nobody's going to bother you. Or you go off visiting, or you're just playing your drum or whatever it is you're doing, because there's always plenty of people who want to hunt. It's hard, it's difficult, but it's fun. People want to do it. And the gathering trips, somebody described it, it's like a picnic with children. You're going out and picking blueberries and picking things, and everybody communally is cooking together, they're sharing everything together. So it's a very playful approach to life. Now, once you had farming, this changes, because the other thing within the hunter-gatherer culture is everything is shared. There's no hierarchy. There's no bosses, no employees. All the decisions are made by group discussion. But once you have farming, then you've got to have land ownership. And once you have land ownership, once you're going to plant stuff, you have to then guard what you've planted. You can't just let somebody else come and take it from you. You now you have land ownership. You own this property. And you also have now the possibility of raising more food. When you're hunting and gathering, you just gather and hunt what you need to eat. You don't get more. There's no point in getting more. You don't have any way of storing the food anyway, and so on and so forth. But once you're farming and you've got grain, which you could store, you can begin to accumulate things. You can accumulate food. You can also have more children. Hunter-gatherers their children are very much spaced apart. And the reason for that, as it turns out, is because if you're a hunter-gatherer woman, you're relatively lean and muscular, and you're nursing your child until about 3.5 or 4 years old. And when you're nursing that heavily, and you don't have a lot of body fat, you stop ovulating. And so there's this kind of natural birth control so that children are spread out. But once you've got farming, first of all, the women can put on a little more body fat. You can accumulate a lot of food, and you start having many more children. once you've got a lot of children, now you've got to feed all those children. And so you have to have the children helping you. The older children have to help you feed the younger children. So you've got to make them work in the fields. The girls maybe are helping take care of the younger children, working around the house, but they also might be working in the fields. The boys are also working in the fields. So you have to, and so there's less opportunity for the children to choose what they want to do. They've got to work. Now you've got this concept of work. You also, over time, once you have the idea of ownership, you begin to have the idea that some people are owners and some people are dependent upon the owners. So now you have a hierarchy. You have some people who are lords and masters over other people. So within the family, you had the notion that the men are the master of the house and the women are subordinate to them and the children are subordinate to everybody and they have to follow rules. Ultimately, what this led to in Europe and Asia is ultimately feudalism, where you had just a few lords and masters who, in theory, at least owned everything, and everybody else was subordinate to them. Now, if you are in that situation, imagine you are raising a child and you're in a situation where the lord of the manor could kill your child if that person wanted to and could get away with it. If that person is disobedient in the way my son was disobedient, right? That would be very dangerous. So the goal of child raising became, whereas for hunter-gatherers, they admired their children's willfulness. They admired the fact that the children chose to do their own things, and they liked the fact that the children were independent. But once you go to this other kind of a society, that would be dangerous. So you have to kind of quite literally beat the children, the willfulness out of children. You have to teach them to obey. Obedience became the primary lesson of parenting. So the way I think of it is, even though we say that the purpose of school is to learn all these academic subjects and so on and so forth, in some sense, the real lesson is still obedience.
Right.
That was the lesson that my son refused to accept. It's still obedience, because the only way you can succeed in schools is to do what you're told to do. And almost the only way you can fail is not to do what you're told to do. It's not that hard, as I kept telling my son. If you do what you're told to do, it's not that difficult. But if you refuse to do what you're told to do, you are in trouble.
In Asia, it's the modern school only appeared, I think, probably around 100 years ago, where kids go. It used to be it's very interesting. It used to be schooling is only limited to the elite, right? So you're like at the top. You probably know in China there's a system called Keju, which is basically a national test that started 1,000 years ago, where everybody have to go through the same sort of classics. And although there isn't a Bible, but there is a classics of work, and then that was dating from 500 BC and around that time, and everybody have to remember line by line and know how to interpret it, and then the whole test is about writing articles about those classics or interpreting what the classics are, and that has been a tradition for really over 1,000 years. The Keju system only broke down, I think, if I remember right, 1905, or something like that. But even since then, it was so interesting. It was part of the introduction of modern education is actually through missionaries who came to Asia to China around that time, so that the new schools were firstly built by the missionaries. And in fact, around that time, it was good for China because it was the first time. So it's actually missionaries who opened the first school for the disabled, the first school for women, for example, in China, because women can't education. So in a way, at least the religious part, it wasn't that religious in the form in China. But one of the things I think I got a lot of questions from parents, like they would say, oh, if I read your book, I agree. If you look at human nature, we're natural learners, the hunter-gatherer is part of us. But hey, come on, that's like, we've been in the farming cultures for 10,000 years. Okay, come on, I need to succeed in today's world. I need to be able to, get a job on the Wall Street. And then if, like the way to be successful in today's world seems to be following the system, right?
Right,
And then yes, you talk about this 11-year-old boy Kiwi who's in this, Africa tribe who seems to be very happy. But
right,
hey, he's in Africa.
right,
So like
right,
then if I pose this challenge to you, how would you respond to that? Like why do I have
right.
to care? I agree, but
Yeah,
hey, come on,
if
let's be realistic.
so if I had not done that study of the graduates of Sudbury Valley, if all I knew was how education worked in hunter-gatherer cultures, I would say, oh, wow, that's really interesting. I wish we lived in a hunter-gatherer culture, right? And my son would be so happy there, and I might be happier there. It's the my I was interested in the hunter-gatherer culture because I was trying to understand why this education system works so well in our culture. And I was trying to get back to the basics of it. What are the principles of it? So here's what I would say. I would say, in a certain sense, I think that the kind of education that teaches obedience and following rules and doing what you're told to do made a certain amount of sense until fairly recently. It made a certain amount of sense. I still wouldn't agree with it, but it made a certain amount of sense. So at a time when most people were making a living doing factory work, if you're just doing the same routine thing over and over and over again in the factory, then a training in just being able to tolerate boring stuff, being willing to do what you're told to do, being willing to follow rules in a job that doesn't require being creative. The same could be true. It doesn't have to be an assembly line. It could be being an accountant where your job is just to do certain calculations over and over and over again as an accountant. Or you're a middle businessman and there, any kind of job that does not require much creativity, but requires an ability to stick to it, an ability to discipline yourself, to do what you're told to do and to follow rules, a certain ability to read and write because the rules might be written and you've got to be able to read them, a certain ability to do some calculations because you may have to deal with numbers in your job. All of that was being taught in school, and it was helping to reinforce the economy the way it was working. Today, think how different the world is. And I'm sure the same is true in China as in the United States. As the world is changing, the kinds of careers that people have are are being taken over by the kinds of jobs I just were describing are being taken over by robots, right? The
Yeah.
robots are doing the assembly line work. Computers are doing the calculations. We don't need people can do that. We don't need people who can memorize a lot of information. We've all got this right here, and we just pick, if we need to know something, we just, you know, click a couple of buttons and we can find the answer to it. So what do we need in our culture today? We need people who, first of all, have social skills. We need people who know how to work with other people. That's probably one of the most important skills for anybody to be successful. To be successful even in the business world, you need to know how to make connections with other people. You need to know how to please other people, how to cooperate. This is what children practice in play. This is not learned. You can't teach that in a class. You can't lecture on that. We need people who are creative. We need people who can invent new ways of doing things. We're a world that's changing very rapidly, and the people who know how to change things and keep up with the change, they're the ones who are successful. Employers are looking for people, not people who know the answers to questions that have already been answered. They're looking for people who can answer questions that haven't been answered, who really know how to explore, and perhaps most of all, or not necessarily more important than I've just described, but equally important, we need people who are lifelong learners. We need people who are always going to have an open mind, ready to learn new things, eager to learn new things, who are resilient, who can. Now, these are the skills that come from self-directed education. These are the skills that when I talk to the graduates of Sudbury Valley, or when I talk to, I've also done research studying grown unschoolers. So these are people who were homeschooled by a philosophy similar to what I described for Sudbury Valley. And when I interview these people and ask them, so what do you think has led you to be successful? They'll say things like, I learned how to take responsibility for myself. I learned how to get along well with other people. I had all day long to socialize, I learned who I am, what I like to do, and I'm in a job I like to do. And I learned how to take control of my life and to solve problems. And so those are the kinds of things that the people say have led them to be successful in today's world. So I think that the time is better right now than it has been in past decades for this kind of education. The world is looking for people who are self-directed, self-controlled, who I hear from bosses who say that they complain about many of the college students that they hire because they want to be told exactly what to do. They're used to being told what to do, and the bosses will say, I hired them to figure out what to do. I didn't hire. If I knew what to do, I wouldn't need them. So
Yeah, no, indeed. You're right. I think it was so interesting. Like now, although this is 10 years after your book is published in English, I mean, it's an interesting time to introduce this one because in 2013, I think there isn't a lot of discussion about AI yet.
that's right. Yes, right. But we were moving in that direction already. Yes.
Yeah. And then, but now it's so interesting. I think again, for people who are interested in the book, 大家可以在直播间看到中文版的这本书。But it's an interesting time because I think that's exactly. I think people were in a way forced to rethink about education now,
Yes.
right?
I think that's right.
Yeah, given what AI can do, exactly. I think that's well, it to fundamentals is pretty simple. Like we want human to be more human.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly. We
And
don't
then
we don't we don't need humans to be robots. We've got them.
I feel bad. I don't want them for that. Yeah, but I think in a way, especially in China in the last 40 years, even at a distance, you probably know China has kind of economic
Yeah.
uptake. But it was frankly by allowing a lot of people to be robots. And if you ever travel to southern China, see all the fact like where iPhone used to be made, it's
Yes.
basically assembly line, and then people were cheaper than robots. And then that's
Right.
why you get all the 16-year-olds, 17-year-olds who you don't even have to finish high school, and then the factory has like 200,000 people working, and then it's actually quite daunting to watch, like when because they live in the dorm as well. So basically they basically live in the dorm on the factory field, on the factory campus, and then they
Yes.
wake up, eat and move, and then like they work for 12 hours a day, and that's it. So like in a way, like sometimes as a Chinese I feel very split because it is those people who drove the economic miracle, right? Because they
Yes. Yes.
have given up the history. But like if you think about what kind of like human capital loss the
Right.
country had, is actually even graver. We see the visible part, which is okay, the GDP being produced, the export that's coming out of it. But as you have pointed out, but like the human ingenuity part was all kind of thrown out of the window.
Right.
And that's
Right.
the cost, and people don't see it, right? Because it's easier to measure the numbers or the revenue.
Exactly.
Yeah, and it's harder to measure
Right.
the sort of the human ingenuity.
I'm glad you brought up measurement because I think that a fundamental flaw in thinking about education is that it's possible to measure education.
Right.
You
Yeah.
can't you can't measure it. Everybody's education is different. We're not all on the same track. We shouldn't be all on the same track. You know what? Your interests are different from my interests. So what sense would it make to say you're ahead of me or I'm ahead of you? maybe on something like a road race or something, but but in terms of education in the broad sense, you can't measure it. You can't measure, you can't, people, it's the very fact of measurement that keeps people from being creative, because what your job is in school is to improve the score on whatever the measure is, and that narrows you down rather than broadens you out. It prevents creativity, it prevents innovation.
Yeah. Yeah, indeed. And then that's the biggest paradox. And I was actually talking to a teacher because, our school effort, I know a lot of teachers. And then they showed me that not only the kids are being measured, and the teachers are being measured too. And then
Yes.
the school principals are like, she showed me the scorecard of how she's being measured, like how many, like in the 45-minute lecture, how many like key knowledge points you have taught the kids.
Oh boy, yes.
Delivery, and then they made a fancy name for it. This is called like a quantifiable, like
Right,
data driven improvement.
right, right. So this all sounds very scientific when you use these measurements in this kind of language, but it's science misapplied. You're not,
Yeah, absolutely. So that's why coming to your book again, this book, chapter 4, you actually use a very strong word. You call it the 7 sins, sins of
oh
the
yes.
fourth education. Yeah, tell us about it. I think it was actually very right, spot on, and it actually related to what we talked about. Like, I think that science misapplied is how
Yes,
the
right.
legitimacy. So deprive kids of freedom without the right reason or the right procedure.
Okay, yeah. You know, we should never deprive. I think a key idea that I'm trying to get across in the book is that children are human beings, but human beings have certain fundamental rights, and you don't take those rights away from people unless there's some reason. You put somebody in prison if they've committed a crime. You put them in a mental hospital if they're dangerous to themselves or other people. You have to prove that this person needs to be in an institution. But here with children, we put them in an institution where their rights are being taken away from them without any proof that they're not competent outside of that institution. So and that's in a sense what my son was complaining about, that
Right.
just because of age, he was being required to be in something that I think is quite reasonably called a prison, where his rights are being taken away. He doesn't have the right to even go to the bathroom without asking for permission, let alone to his own ideas, or to do what he chooses to do, or to read whatever book he wants to read instead of the book they want him to read.
Yeah.
So I think that was the first sin.
Exactly. I found one of your early article, I think in Chinese, you call it denial of liberty on the basis of age.
Yes, exactly.
And
Yeah.
then, and number 2 is fostering of shame, and or on the other hand, and hubris on the other.
Right. So the way you motivate children to study the curriculum and get a high test score is you shame them if they don't succeed. If you make them feel like they're not as good as the other people. Or if they succeed, then they're motivated by pride. I'm better than the other people. And this is not a good attitude to have. Either one of those is not a good attitude to have. I'm just me and you're just you, and we're different and we have different interests. That's a much better attitude, in my opinion, rather than one in which you're always comparing yourself to other people. Are you ahead, in which case you supposedly feel proud, or are you behind, in which case you feel ashamed? I'm not as good as these other people.
Yeah. It feels
So
like
we don't, that's the way I mean, in the early schools in the West, they motivated them by beating them with a stick if they didn't do well. But now we do it by shaming them.
Mental stick.
I think there are some kids who would rather be beaten with a stick.
Yeah, absolutely. And number 3, you said, is interference with the development of cooperation and nurturance.
Yeah, so in school, the each person is supposed to be doing their own work. You're working as an individual. You're supposed to, this is all an individual product. And if you ask for help from another student, that would be cheating, right? That would be, if you ask another student, how would you answer this question? There might be certain exercises in school that are designed to be cooperative, but for the most part, they're individual things. And the lesson is that that learning is individual and that it's competitive. The goal is to do, this relates to the other issue that I was saying, the goal is to, I myself do this better than other people do it.
Yep.
It promotes a spirit of individual achievement as opposed to cooperation. But we live in a world where cooperation has always been very important for human beings. Hunter-gatherers live by cooperation. They couldn't survive without cooperation because they have to share food, they have to cooperate in everything they do. One individual family even couldn't get all the food they need. If you go out hunting and you don't get anything, you depend upon the other people in the band who got something to share with you. And so we're designed for cooperation. I have a friend who's actually a fairly famous scientist, a biologist, and he tells me they shouldn't even give a Nobel Prize because nobody achieves anything by themselves anymore. It's always a group effort. It's always a whole team of people working on this or that. And so we need people who know how to work in a team and share ideas, and that's not really what is happening in school. What is happening in school is the idea you're not supposed to share, you're supposed to do your own work, just yourself.
Yeah, yeah. You also mentioned in your earlier paper and talking about how age separation of kids is a way of, interfering with such cooperation, right? Because the
Yes.
kids naturally were, brought up in a mixed age group, but then
Right.
we're artificially separated. That leads to a certain power structure based on age.
That's right. Yeah. And in age mixing, one of the things that everybody learns is that I can help people who are younger than me. And that's an important thing to learn. I don't have to just be the one who's helped. I can be helping somebody else.
Yeah, indeed. On this one, I want to add one question because I think probably lots of people are familiar with Montessori education, which is big on mixing age and
Yes.
directed. Yeah, what do you see as or do you think they're in the same category as what Sudbury Valley is doing, or this is something unique that's different from?
Well, so I think that there are some similarities between Montessori schools and Sudbury Valley, but I think in Montessori schools, the teacher is still ultimately responsible for the children learning certain lessons. And so they may use age mixing and they may do things that they call play, but it's fairly structured play. It's sort of like you're playing with these blocks, and the purpose of the blocks is to learn certain lessons from the blocks, and that's why you're playing with those blocks. If you were a child in a Montessori school and you said, I don't want to play with these blocks, I want to go off and I want to play this other thing that's entirely different from the blocks. In most Montessori schools anyway, you couldn't do that. There's a lot more freedom, and there is age mixing, and older children are helping younger children and so on and so forth, but it's not, there's much more adult structure to what's going on than in a school like Sudbury Valley.
Yeah, okay. Thank you for that. And then now we move on to the list that we almost have. The number 4 thing you said is interference with the development of personal responsibility and self-direction.
Yeah, so when you're always told what to do, you're not taking responsibility for yourself. So one of the ways I think of it is I've become convinced that children come into the world believing that they're responsible for their own education. They don't articulate it that way, but that's in their nature, that's in their instincts, because throughout almost all of human biological history, that was the case. There were no, you weren't being taught. You might, your parents or other adults might tell you which mushrooms are poisonous. Don't eat those mushrooms. They would point certain things out, but they don't teach you how to hunt and gather. They don't teach you the music and so forth. You learn it by observing it, by playing at it. You learn it in your own self-directed way. And so over the history of human beings, those instincts to learn, of curiosity, to explore, to play at the things that are valuable to your culture, those all were developed, and children naturally have those. But if we keep telling children that that's a waste of time and what you need to be doing is what we're telling you to do, this is how you become educated, by doing what you're telling you to do, then you can sort of talk them out of the idea that they're responsible for their own education. And they may even stop taking that responsibility, not just because they don't have time for it, because you're taking up all their time with the adult directed things, but also because you're convincing them in a sense that they end up thinking themselves that what I want to do is a waste of time. And the important thing for me to do is what other people are telling me to do, what these teachers are telling me to do.
Yeah, yeah, indeed. It's taking away for the real gem of
Yes.
of learning. The next one is my personal favorite. It says number 5, the fifth thing is that linking of learning with fear, loathing, and drudgery.
Oh yeah. Oh, how many children hate school? And we always talk about, teachers always think, oh, I'm going into teaching because I want to teach a love of learning, right? And so, well, the thing is, kids naturally have a love of learning, but unfortunately we take that away when we make them learn what the curriculum tells them that they're supposed to learn, instead of allowing them to learn what they want to learn. Children love to learn, but they love to learn what they want to learn in the way that they want to learn it. And we've decided, no, everybody's going to learn to read at the same age in the same way. And that makes learning to read, or whatever it is that you're being taught in school, it makes it painful.
Yeah. Yeah, indeed. And I think it was so interesting when I told you we started the school, and of course I knew nothing about education when I started the school, but I was using this very simple principle myself. I was like, well, if you want to know which school is a good school, you just ask the kids, do you want to go to school today? Right? If the answer is yes, that means it's a good school. If the answer is no, it doesn't matter what you say, like, what
I
grade.
agree. I think that's brilliant. I think that's the best measure of whether a school is a good school, if the kids are happy there.
Yeah, indeed. But like oftentimes we're so like, carried away with all this whatever measurements you and I talked about, right? As
Right.
if, okay, if you look at, this is our the CV of our teachers. Okay, they're Harvard graduates, or this is our like facility, this is our
Right.
swimming pool. Like we use all this as a replacement of how the children feel, and we dismiss the most important thing in education.
Right.
And then the last one, no, it's last two. Then the second to last is inhibition of critical thinking.
Yeah. So critical thinking is, so in school, your job, for the most part, is to give the answer that the teacher wants, right? Is to come up with the answer that you're supposed to come up with. And if you, there might be some classes and some times when you can disagree with the teacher, when you can say, no, I think this is true. And there may be some teachers, to a limited degree, will allow you to do that. And maybe even an occasional course where that's part of what you're supposed to do. But for the most part, if you're going to teach a curriculum and if you've got a bunch of critical thinkers in the class, it becomes chaos because everybody's got different questions. You'll never make it through the curriculum. Everybody's got questions about everybody wants to disagree. Everybody, that was one of my son's problems. He would argue with the teacher, and he continued to do that when he went to college. But in college, I think the teacher would just say, well, let's have that argument in my office instead of in class. And so he would go and so he could still engage in critical thinking with in where he disagreed with what the professor said. But I think it's interesting. So the great Russian psychologist Lev Vygotsky in the 1920s and 30s argued that critical thinking, which is very important in to be an intellectual person, comes from dialogue. It comes from having discussions with other people. So you say something and then somebody else says, well, I don't completely agree with you about that. So, have you thought about this part of it, or what would happen if this happened? And then you've got to respond to that. And so it's sort of this back and forth where your initial statement that seems true to you gets challenged by somebody else in some kind of way. Ideally, it's in a friendly way, but you're engaging in the discussion. And as a result of engaging in the discussion, at some point you begin to internalize that discussion. So I might say something about what I believe, but then I can imagine what my friend who would say in response to that. And I have this dialogue within my own head, and that's critical thinking, right? So critical thinking comes from the ability to disagree and have discussions and respect all different opinions. And when you have a school system that's based on everybody getting the right answer to questions, then that defeats defeats the possibility of critical thinking.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, now these are to the last one, which is reduction in diversity of skills, knowledge, and ways of thinking.
So here, think of in our world today, there's an infinite amount of information and knowledge out there. There's many, many ways of making a living. There's so much out there. Nobody can learn more than just a little sliver of it, right? You or I or no child is going to be able to learn everything there is to know. I mean, if you went back to Aristotle's time, maybe you could legitimately believe that Aristotle knew everything there was to know, and if you understood Aristotle, then you were an educated person because you knew everything. But nobody could make that argument today, right? We can only all learn. So why do we have an educational system where everybody's supposed to learn the same sliver, right? Why not allow people to learn different things that they're interested in? Why should everybody have to learn the same things? We put everybody through the same curriculum, but we want people who have diverse knowledge as adults. We need some people who are interested in computers, and other people who are interested in agriculture, other people who are interested in the weather and how we're going to control climate, and other people who are artists, and other people who are novel. We need for a rich world, we need people who have very diverse interests. Well, why not let them pursue those interests even when they're children? Yeah. Instead of forcing the person who has zero interest in mathematics to study mathematics. They're not going to remember the mathematics anyway. They're going to just learn it in an artificial way. Let the people study mathematics who want to study mathematics, and they're going to go out and be the mathematicians. You don't have to worry about, everybody's going to learn the math that they need in order to go through their daily life. They learn it in their daily life. Yeah. I also think the other thing that we want everybody to, quite legitimately, it's valuable for everybody to know how to learn is to how to read. But my experience is that that everybody in self-directed education learns how to read. I have never, even though they're not being taught to read, some of them ask for help in learning to read, but they all learn how to read. But they don't all learn how to read at the same age. They learn it at some point when they're interested in it, and they're learning it usually in relationship to some perceived need to read. either because they want to read stories, their mom isn't going to read them the stories anymore, they've got to read them themselves, or because they're doing something. Maybe it's just playing video games, or they're doing something where they have to be able to read the words, and so they learn to read. If you're in a culture where reading is all around you, you're going to learn to read. If you're in a culture where numbers are all around you, you're going to learn how to use numbers quite naturally. Everything else, it doesn't matter whether you learn it or not. What matters is you figure out what you are interested in, and you learn that, and you figure out in this world today, how am I going to make a living doing the things I want to do? And if you can't make a living doing what you want to do, then at least think about, well, what's a way of living that comes closest to what I want to do? And people in self-directed education figure that out, and then they ask the question, well, what do I need to learn? What steps do I need to take to do this thing, to make a living doing this?
Yeah. Thank you. No, indeed. Sometimes I was thinking, yes, I was, of course, in the Chinese system, I was a good student. I was sort of the model student. But even when I was very young, I remember I have this realization. I was like, well, if the entire world were as good as me, then our world will fall apart.
Yeah, that was very insightful of you. I'm sure you're right.
I'm very good at taking tests. That's the only thing I'm good at. I need
I, I,
somebody.
th I think very often, I don't know about in China, but very often I find in the United States, oftentimes the students who are doing the very best in terms of the school system, getting all the honors and so on, are also very cynical about it. They
Yes.
say, you know, I just have learned how to study for tests. I don't remember it after the test, but I've just learned what I need to do to get all the A's that I want. I'm good at that. But they
Exactly.
recognize this is not a skill that's going to be particularly valuable once they're out of school.
Absolutely. Yeah, you learn to game the system. Like you're smart as well. You learn to game the system.
Right.
My own personal story, that's why, people read my blogs. I was basically talking about how I sort of have to unlearn those, right?
Yes.
You hold on to this did make you successful, and it gave you this sense of illusion that somehow I'm good. I'm like top of the world. And then
Right.
that is very toxic too, because that illusion stops you from seeing the truth, like what's
Right.
going on. And I think I started this process like actually after I have children. I was like, wow, when I'm observing them, well, I was like, well, lots of things I thought, the old kind of paradigm kind of fall apart. But
Right.
it was a journey. Alrighty. I know we've kept you along for a long time. I will probably just finish with the last question. I think a lot of people, probably just as me, have enjoyed this conversation immensely. And again, the book, you can find it's in Chinese now, although this is 10 years after the original publication of the book. But first of all, we're lucky enough to still have Peter talk to us. After 10 years, he's written the book, and it's fresh and live. And second, it's a beautiful translation, because I've read the Chinese version. I think the translator and then the publisher did an excellent job doing that.
Good.
So you'll get this book for yourself. And then my last question is probably relating to a lot of maybe our readers who may be parents. And I think a lot of people probably would agree with what you just said, through the forced education system. It's in the news all the time. But there is also this sense of like being little, like the system is so massive, right? The system is, it's a national education machinery. Like there is money, there's curriculum, there's certificates here and there, and you need the certificates to get a job somewhere, even to get for your CV to be seen by some like companies looking for you, like if you're not graduating from certain college, like you're out the door. So like I think I constantly face those questions from parents. So they say, well, I agree with what you said, but come on, I'm just this very common person. I need my kids to survive. And what can I do in face of this when I'm feeling little? Like any advice you have for the parents?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And of course, I I don't have the experience you have of living in China and knowing exactly what the situation there is. What I could say is there are many parents in the United States who feel exactly as you just described, who feel like, yeah, I wish I could do something about it, but what can I do? This is the way the school system is, and so on and so forth. In the United States, this concern is becoming less and less. And I think that there are a number of reasons. First of all, there are in the United States, there are lots of different options open. There are a lot of jobs, good jobs that don't require a college degree, so you don't have to necessarily go to college, and that pay well. And there's also a growing understanding among many employers that people don't really learn much in college that has to do with their job anyway, and they're just as well off hiring people who haven't prepared themselves academically in that sense. What they are looking for is people who have skills and who are eager to be on the job. And I think that's one of the reasons that people who have gone through a school like Sudbury Valley, or they've been homeschooled by the method of unschooling, are getting good jobs. They don't seem to have difficulty, and they're going on. There's not any uniform requirement. There are many in the United States, as you might know, there are many different kinds of colleges, and there are community colleges, and anybody can go to a community college, and it's very low cost. And if you go to a community college and do okay, then you can go to a four-year college from that. So there are many different routes open. And I know that's not true. It's not even true everywhere in Europe, let alone in Asia. So I know that the situation is somewhat different. So I'd be a little hesitant to act like I know exactly what to tell parents there. But here's something that I can say. I think that what children need most from their parents is the belief, is the recognition that their parents love them and respect them for who they are. and that who they are is not measured in school. Who they are is something else, and it is their tenderness, it's their compassion, it's their feeling for other people, so that's and I think that there are studies in the United States that show that the children who are suffering most in school are not the children from poverty, as some people might think. They're the children from the wealthier class who are very achievement oriented, and they expect their children to be getting perfect scores in school, to be getting into the fanciest college. And the children feel that they're failures if they don't succeed in that. And so there's research showing that what protects the children from that is if the parents don't hold those expectations. This is up to you, the child. This is up to you. If you want to try to make it into a fancy school, that's fine. I'll support you in that. But this is up to you. My love of you does not depend upon that. I love you no matter what. That's I think the maybe the biggest gift that parents can give to their children. And also if parents can recognize and provide the opportunities for the kind of learning that doesn't occur in school. So if you can find ways that your child gets lots of opportunity to just play with other children in a non-school context, just really play, the more you can provide that opportunity, the better. They're going to learn a lot that they can't be learning, the things that can't be taught in school, learning how to get along with one another, learning how to tell if my playmate is happy or not. These are the most important lessons in life. And so by just providing opportunities for your children to play, and by not trying to get your child to live the life that you've decided for your child, but rather to encourage the child to find the life that they want for themselves.
Yeah, so well said. Thank you so much. Yeah, when
Right.
you're I was thinking, I guess the difficulties for most parents to do that, when you were saying like,
Yes.
your child as they are, is that lots of our parents weren't treated that way themselves when they
Yeah.
were like they were measured based on how they like. So it's almost this inertia, like this like
Right.
passed on generationally.
I'm very sympathetic with parents on that. I can really understand. Everybody wants their child to do well, and then the problem is, well, what does doing well mean? And and maybe it really requires parents to think about, one of the things I sometimes say in the United States, imagine that you were attending your own funeral and you could hear what people were saying about your life, right? And so which of these statements about your life would you most want to hear? So one of the statements was, this was a person who loved life, who was happy in life, who was a good parent, who was a good friend, who gave more to the world just by virtue of who they were than they took, versus this is a person who achieved the highest score in the nation on the standardized test, went on to Harvard, and who, which of these, in your heart, which of these would you rather hear about yourself? And I think, now, of course, some people say, oh, both. And I say, no, that's not fair. You've got to choose one or the other. But when I make them choose one or the other, they choose that first one. And then I say, well, isn't that what you would like your child to have too? And so what does it take to be sure that your child has that, grows that way, and knows who they are, and loves life, and cares for other people, and is not selfish, and all of these kinds of things. So
Yeah, yeah. Beautifully said. Thank you. I think we'll wrap up with the last. We kind of. I think I'm curious. I think most of our readers and audience are probably curious. So what happened to your son afterwards?
well, he's still at the Sudbury Valley School. He's a staff member there. So
Oh,
he did go on to college because he could go free, but he actually feels that was a waste of time. And then he worked. He was good at computers, and he worked running the computers for a furniture chain, trained in furniture stores in the Boston area for a while. But as soon as a position of staff opened up at Sudbury Valley, that's what he wanted to do. I mean, he feels he's very emotionally committed to the school. He'll be there all his life as long as they keep rehiring him to staff. So this is his passion in life, is that particular school, which he believes saved him, so
yeah.
yeah,
Wow. Well, that's a beautiful return. Right. So it's both a return and a restart. That's
right,
wow. Beautiful.
yeah,
Thank you for sharing.
yes.
Okay, wonderful. Well, I think again, thank you so much, Peter, for having this conversation with us and for writing this book. And of course, thanks for the publisher for making this available in Chinese. And again, you can find this book 在我们直播间可以下单. And yeah, thank you so much
Well,
again.
thank you. This has been delightful.